You're breaking up a little bit there in the end, Devan, Murugan, but I'm sure the viewers were privy to the insights that were shared by the Commissioner. I've got the NFP's Sheikh Imam who joins me now, also Member of Parliament. Thank you very much for your patience this afternoon. And maybe let's start with the focus on infrastructure that was mentioned by the Minister. This is a big issue because we've spoken about the infrastructure fund, the build, and really just extending projects driven by government, and this happens at an extremely low pace. And I just wonder if you're encouraged by the fact that it was mentioned and if it will be ramped up accordingly.
Well, let me start off by saying that yes, indeed, he's talking about 68 billion to 112 billion over the medium term, and yet we know year in and year out that we have underspending when it comes to infrastructure. We're not getting value for money, and a lot of these projects are unduly delayed. Now, so that means we clearly do not have the necessary capacity, and yet you want to roll out 112 billion over the medium term. Yes, indeed, we agree as the NFP that infrastructure development in the country, if implemented timeously and you're getting value for money, will create a lot of job, boost economic growth in the country. But clearly, we do not have the capacity, and all we are asking is this: while you're allocating those resources, put in capacity so we'd be able to implement them and have economic growth in the country.
Excuse me. Please.
All right. So that's the issue as far as infrastructure is concerned. Now let's look at the issue of Eskom particularly. He's talking about bailing out Eskom to the tune of perhaps about 200 billion rand. We understand that you do not have a necessary choice in the country because Eskom can bring the entire country down because of its 400 billion rand debt. However, what is not telling us that while you're dealing with the debt, how are you going to turn Eskom around to ensure? Because remember that economic growth in the country means creating jobs. Creating jobs, businesses must survive. Businesses must have energy and electricity supply consistently for them to be able to survive and produce. But they're not able to do that. So he's not basically telling us how is he going to turn Eskom around. Now, I remember him saying about conditions. Eskom have been given conditions year in and year out and have never kept to the condition. On the issue of Denel, we welcome that. Let us not forget, many years ago, Denel was the pride and joy of South Africa. We're talking about a 12 billion rand order book. I think it will go a long way in sustaining those jobs, boosting Denel once again, and it might turn out to be one of the successful state-owned entities. So we welcome that. On the issue of crime particularly, now he talks about the rolling out of police officers, taking up to 15,000 over the medium term. We want to say again and again, you can put 100,000 officers on the ground unless you get to the root causes of the high levels of crime, which includes higher levels of unemployment, the socio-economic conditions that our people are living on, substance abuse, the dysfunctional families, and that is why we believe social development, together with law enforcement and basic education, must all come together. Identify dysfunctional children and families from school level. Deal with the root causes so that you can create a better and a safer society. If you're not going to be able to, you're going to keep pouring in more and more resources to police officers. The responsibility of security agents is to create a safe and secure environment, not to deal with the crime after it is committed.
That's a very important point you bring up there, and it also brings out the funding that will be allocated to other legal state organs like the NPA and the SIU. The corruption component is extremely important, and some have argued that the just over 100 million rand that he's allocating is not enough.
Clearly not enough with the amount of work that needs to be done. And we know even there we have a lack of capacity. You don't have the human resource. Now, the point is this. Again, I want to reiterate this point, and that is, should we not prevent these levels of corruption and that is taking place and looting? Why not put mechanisms in place to prevent that? And one ideal example is, which I'm glad that the Minister has alluded to today, about bringing in capacity as far as local government is concerned. Now, let's take at local government. Remember, the CEO of supply chain estimated we lose between about 40% on goods and services, which is about 300 billion rand a year, because you don't get value for money as a result of corruption. Now, my question is, why not close those gaps so people do not loot, rather than allowing them to loot and bring law enforcement agencies to deal with them after that? So, now you're going to be spending good money going after bad. Are you going to be able to recover those monies? You're not going to be able to recover them. How many people have already been incarcerated in prison with all the corruption and looting that we have taken? Very little or nothing is happening. So you now are going to spend and spend and spend. You've already lost hundreds of billions of rands in this country. You continuously losing today. As we talk here, people are involved in corrupt deals, particularly at local government level. Point is, political parties, wherever they govern, will do nothing about it. Do you know why? Because they all sustain themselves to those corrupt men. If you remember what the president himself said in the Zondo Commission, yes, at times we received and we realized it was through unlawful means, but we kept it because we need it. We are a big organization. What is the message you're giving around to people? It's okay. So the problem is we know where the problem areas are. We need to close those gaps rather than allowing people to lead. Look at the statistics. You created 17,500 black millionaires and multimillionaires in this country in the last couple of years. How much have they put back into the economy? All through your BEE. So we know there are challenges there. Let's get out and close those gaps and ensure that people are held accountable. And if you can do that, we'll save a lot of money. South Africa does not need to borrow. In fact, you can bring your debt down sooner than we think.
Thank you very much for joining us. That is the NFP's Sheikh Imam joining us there. The NFP weighing in on what the minister delivered today and saying more could be done. I'm going to hand it over to Devan Murugan with further commentary around the statement today.
Thanks very much indeed, Rofhiwa. Well, another big issue around the budget this afternoon. We heard the finance minister talk about it when he addressed the issue of transfer. He says if you don't settle or try and get some sort of remedy to the crime situation in the country, what you will have are despondent investors. So it immediately affects investors. One industry that knows that very, very well is the agricultural industry. And I want to bring in Agri-SA Chief Economist Kulani Siwiya. Kulani, thanks indeed for talking to us. So ahead of this budget, you made a point that you want to hear the finance minister say something that supports food security. That's your business. Few things said today. What stood out for you?
So generally speaking, I think it was a tough budget, but it was well needed. I think it was a good budget in terms of if you think about the commitments or the signals that were given by the minister himself. He did point to a whole lot of infrastructure spending, which I think has got a greater multiplier, and this definitely does have a good ripple effect onto the growth of the economy. And just generally speaking, infrastructure is very key to the agricultural sector. So we're very happy in just the broad signals that we received from the minister himself. There's still some few areas of concern, but I think just generally speaking, the budget was well balanced and it was quite a tough one. But
let's talk about those areas of concern. I mean, one of the things that you've got to get your goods on transport, and that transport takes your agricultural produce from point A to point B. So a couple of factors I think that was interesting you were looking out for. One was something around diesel and fuel. This is a very significant component of what you do. What do you make of what was said today?
Yeah, look, I think just to contextualize it, the diesel refund scheme is one incentive that is beneficial to the agricultural sector. And it's very important if you just consider that in the South African agricultural system, we'd received little to no direct government support compared to our international competitors. So such incentives really go a long way in ensuring that the sector remains viable and just sustainable going forward. We were hoping that we would hear a bit of reprieve in that regard. We noted in the last few months that has been decreased. That was announced in March, where the amount that you can claim for has been decreased right now. So we're hoping that the National Treasury would maybe have sanity prevailing and seeing them bring it back to the levels that are beneficial for the sector, because this really does go a long way ensuring that the sector remains positive footing.
The other thing was how your losses and your gains are measured in proportion to the amount of tax you paid was another thing you brought up, because that really speaks to the financial health of the agricultural sector and farmers, right? Were you happy with that?
Not quite. We didn't hear anything in that regard. The National Treasury was very mute in that, and this is very concerning, because when they introduced this amendment bill, they took into consideration a commercial business entity that operates with a normal business cycle. cycle. But unfortunately for agriculture, it's very cyclical and very seasonal. Now, such an amendment bill will have dire impacts on the agricultural sector because they may have losses in this particular year and it will take years for them to really recover from that. So that such a bill really does put a dampen onto the good work that National Treasury has done so far. But as eNCA, we remain vigilant and proactive in engaging with government to ensure that the agricultural sector is still getting some form of relief or reprieve in this regard.
Yeah. I just want to be a bit more specific on the first question. So Transnet getting 5.8 billion rand. There are clients across the spectrum, the mining industry being possibly the biggest one, but the agricultural industry uses them a lot as well. So 5.8 billion rand going to Transnet, but the minister points out that, look, there are peripheral issues around that needs to be sorted out. Copper theft, crime in general, vandalism, and just the state of operations of Transnet. You would have been looking at that very, very carefully as the agricultural sector. What did you make of what he had to say about Transnet?
Yeah, look, as it stands right now, ideally farmers would want to be transporting their goods on rail system. It's just much more cheaper for them, but they are forced then to move onto the roads just because of the inefficiencies that are prevailing in that era. From one side, we once heard a farmer saying that the issues that they have is that they can put cattle into a train today, but it gets to the other side, it's built up, and that's quite concerning because you need the efficiencies in this regard. We're quite happy that the National Treasury is focusing on ensuring that Transnet gets back to the correct trajectory in order for them to be sustainable, to be profitable, and also efficient. But obviously all of this will need to be done timelessly. It needs to be done efficiently, and this will be a key game changer for the agricultural sector that's already been hit by higher input costs in the past year or the past 2 years for that matter. So we're quite encouraged by that, and we're hoping that from a Transnet point of view that will solve their operational challenges.
Yeah, just finally, before I let you go, it's one thing for the finance minister to set aside a budget for that, when it goes right down to the grassroots level on the operations and decision making at these major stakeholders. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't yield a result. That would apply with crime because you have people stealing some of the produce on these cargo trains and whatever else is transported. Again, there's a police minister coming here. Should we have effective policing on that? It's not just all about allocating the funds, is it? You've got to have competency and capacity at the bottom end.
Precisely. And I mean, if you think about just some of the crimes that are happening in the rural areas, the farming community has come to the table to say we are offering to assist you in terms of the safety and, around all of this in the rural areas, where farmers themselves are setting up cameras, they're setting up some safety operations and safety infrastructure in that regard. And that's an opportunity for government just to team up with the agricultural sector in ensuring that just not only in the metros but also in the rural areas we're finding that safety happening around. And you speak about this, the stolen goods or the stolen products that are being affected, but there's also murder crimes in the rural areas, particularly of farmers in this regard. So yes, the allocation is there. I'm quite happy that they've allocated a significant amount to policing. Let's just hope it goes to the right places, particularly when you look at it in the rural areas.
Thanks very much indeed. The chief economist there for Agri-SA. We'll be taking a look at a more economic reaction, I suppose, as the late afternoon progresses. But that's it for now. Rofhiwa, Madzena still continuing with the political reaction?
That's right, Devan. And of course, throughout the afternoon, we've heard different views from different political parties and members of parliament around what the minister shared in terms of the medium-term budget policy statement. Some positives, but a lot of negatives, and a lot of work that government still needs to do to revive the government in some shape or form. We've got COPE's William Adisha joining us this afternoon to get COPE's weigh in on the statement that was delivered by the minister. And he didn't really give an outlook on the average South African consumer around dealing with the sky-high cost of living at the moment because of inflation and things like that. We just got a broad sense of this is what the economy looks like at the moment, and this is the outlook, and the special distress relief grant will remain for another year. What are your thoughts in that? He wasn't specific about the outlook for the consumer and the plan thereof.
Yes, exactly. You are correct. We're extremely disappointed because we had thought that he will not repeat that which they say each and every day. They come here to say this is the budget presentation. What he did was to repeat what he has said, and what we have now as a country, it's a debt. We talk here about 5 trillion. When we talk about that, he has not said anything about that. You talk here about 400 billion rent which must be taken forward pay for electricity, etc. He has not said anything about that. All that he said was to recognize that, yes, we have this kind of a problem. Now, I must emphasize that for as long as enough money, all those billions are not addressed to pay for electricity, etc., companies go on, they get closed, people lose their jobs, companies don't work anymore, hunger grows. We have this as a major problem. You may have followed the Reserve Bank recently spoke about the increase in terms of the interest rates. Now, he has said nothing about that, and we are therefore not getting anywhere at all. All the monies that have been misused, he has not said anything. For example, you talk about the Zondo Commission. He has not reason to say this is how we're going to put aside for that to be addressed. Now, these are the kind of problems we are faced with, and I therefore am saying as COPE, we are unhappy. We have not received anything at all from this kind of repetitions that we get from the ANC government ministers.
Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Very disappointed there. You heard COPE just indicating that it's the same rhetoric that is expressed every single year when the midterm budget policy statement is presented, Gareth. And of course, they would have liked to see more. And you would have heard that other political parties indicating that there will be a Q&A session with the minister to unpack the details around this statement. And they will be asking questions for specifics. When it comes to Eskom, how much of the debt are they going to become taking on? You know, when it comes to SANRAL, is it really a situation where the e-toll will be coming to an end, or are they hidden costs that will be exposed to as Gauteng residents? So many things to unpack, Gareth, and I think I'll get an opportunity to speak to Al Jama'a in a moment. I'll throw it back to you for now.